Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Dr. Dilsora Fozilova. In today's lecture, we will continue our conversation on deviant subcultures. Specifically, we are going to focus on the intersections of power, counterculture, and social movements. And today's lecture, I'll be taking 1960s counterculture movement in the United States as an example to our conversation. We are going to explore some of the big ideas around how power operates in society, how groups challenge that power, and what happens when movements raise up and demand change. So to start with, let's define some of the key terms. However, we will be defining them in a more deeper sense when I start my PowerPoint. Power is the ability to influence or control behavior of others, often seen through institutions like government, the military, or even cultural norms. Counterculture, on the other hand, are the movements that reject or challenge the dominant social norms. Think of it as the way of rebelling against the established order, whether through art, behavior, or political activism. Social movements are organized efforts by groups of people to bring about or resist social change, often tied to political, economic, or cultural issues. In the 1960s, counterculture in the United States is an excellent example of how these ideas play out. During this period, youth-led movements rejected mainstream societal values, questioned the status quo, and pushed for radical social change. We will discuss key aspects of movement, such as the rise of civil rights activism, anti-war protests. It was against the US's involvement in the Vietnam War, and the Cultural Revolution seen through art, music, and lifestyle. Throughout this lecture, we will see how power and counterculture clash and interact, as well as how radical social movements shape our lives. By the end of this lecture, I hope you will have better idea or clearer understanding of the forces at play during this important era in the United States history, and hopefully some insight into how these dynamics continue to influence social movements today. So to start with, let me share my PowerPoint and we can continue our discussion. Power, counterculture, and social movements. So let's start with going deeper into the understanding of what power is and how that interacts with counterculture and social movements. Social power, we said the power is the ability to influence people through the governments or even social norms, right? The social power refers to the ability of individual or groups to influence or control the behavior of others and shape societal outcomes. This power can come from various sources. It can be from the government, it can be authorities, it can be social status, it can be from people who get together around certain ideology or ideas. It can be from different resources or control over resources or institutions. For example, if we control certain resources and people have needs for that resources, we can control their behaviors as well. For example, the sanctions given to certain countries in the international relations to demand some behavioral change. You could observe that sanctions were given to Russia after they started war to Ukraine, and there is sanctions to other states. For example, if there is some kind of social disorder, or something is happening and the other countries put some sanctions to stop that behavior. So that sometimes pulling the resources can make people to act in certain ways. So power is very wide. We can understand power in many, many different ways. For example, Foucault, another sociologist, thinks about power in a different sense, that in society, power is distributed everywhere. We have power by putting, for example, bumper on the road. We make cars to slow down. That is the sign of power. We will have better understanding of power as we talk about the social movements today. And social movements are organized efforts by group people to challenge, resist, or promote social change. They are either resisting social change, or they are promoting social change, or they are challenging social change. It is about social change. Movements typically arise in response to perceived inequalities in society or injustices in society. They aim to shift power dynamics between different groups. For example, if there is injustices from the government, now people want to take part of that power and distribute to another more just organizations or people groups, right? It can be about advocating for issues like civil rights, environmental protection, or political reforms. There are two different kinds of social movements. One of them we call old social movements, and the ones we have right now in society, they are new social movements. Old social movements and new social movements, they are different from one another with what they try to change. Old social movements were about the old issues, like ending slavery and civil rights movement. They were old social movements. Now, in today's society, we have new social movements like environmental social movements or feminism. This one's like new social movements exist in our society today. And then counterculture refers to a subculture. Actually, counterculture has similar definition of subculture. One thing different about them is actually they reject or oppose the dominant values, norms, and practices of the mainstream society. Subcultures were different. They have different norms and they live side by side, and then they have their own way of fashion, their own taste of music, for example, which is similar in countercultures too. One exact or clear difference between them is rejection of the mainstream norms and practices in society. Members of countercultures challenge traditional authority, societal expectations, and conventional norms, often advocating for alternative lifestyle or social structures. For example, 1960s movements, they were against the Vietnam War. They wanted peace, and they did not approve US's involvement in the Vietnam War. They were against consumerism or capitalism. They wanted to have different kind of lifestyle. We will talk about that in a bit. They wanted to have idea of like a free love. That is just kind of having, that societal norms at that time and now, that marriages or kind of restrictions through organizations or social institutions, they did not want that restrictions. They wanted to have more different kind of lifestyle. And the key aspects of the countercultures is actually the rejection of mainstream norm is the number one thing. Countercultures fundamentally question the social norms or resist dominant societal norms, from politics to fashion to social relationships. And we will view that 1960s countercultures, they had a specific fashion, like they had like a tie-dye t-shirts or clothes, and it's colorful. It was about flowers, and they drove flowers everywhere in the buses or the walls. And it was about, people becoming together. They just, that stopping or not going to work, they were just living in a communal places. It was just a different kind of lifestyle that mainstream society did not approve. Alternative values, they have alternative values, which means that they promote new or alternative values, often emphasizing personal freedom, creativity, or social justice. Also, when the wars are started by the names of the society, but few elite are the decision makers in these wars, they were against that. That's why in this week's lectures, we started with um, the, the elite, our conversation about power elite. Also, they have different identity and belonging. In the mainstream society, people have similar kind of acceptance for society. For example, like when you go out, you see different kinds of people, wearing different clothes. All of those that hold this idea of how people can dress is kind of accepted in a whole society. And the belonging as well. Countercultures, usually those people who did not feel that they have the sense of belonging or acceptance in society, they went and organized their own countercultures. We will discuss that in a bit. So also the expression of culture was different than the mainstream society. They have different kinds of art, they have different kinds of taste for music, they had different kinds of poetry or dances, that everything was just kind of expressing themselves in a way. It wasn't a thing, or it was not accepted in the mainstream culture. The 1960s counterculture in the USA, for example, used rock music, visual arts, and protests as method of expression. And at the end of lecture, I have some of the examples of the arts and musics they had in 1960s in the USA. So you can see in this picture that colorful clothes and certain ways of dressing, and also that painting everything around them, giving color to culture. That was the kind of 1960s counterculture, elements of counterculture. Social and cultural revolution primarily led by young people. So 1960s counterculture movement was led by young people, and they were against all these different kinds of mainstream values of the time. It included consumerism, which was just getting to the peak point in 1960s after the World War II finished. Also about gender roles, political and social status quo. So what was happening in that era, the people were unhappy about that. So the movement also was characterized by its opposition to Vietnam War. They were like, we did not decided, or we did not want the US's involvement in the Vietnam War. Support for civil rights movement, that right around that time civil rights movement started. And then environmentalism, this group of people were kind of not eating red meat. They were doing a lot of stuff that, more vegan, vegetarian kind of stuff. They were living in a communal places to avoid or showing their resistance towards the wealthy people getting in this mode of consumerism at the time. And also it was about push for personal expression and self-expression and freedom. And there was all different kinds of like a fashion and music and art, and in every area in that at that time was showing some type of differences, that resistance of mainstream norms at the time. So 1970s counterculture movement, there are the rise of hippie culture in 1960s, which embraced peace, love, in communal living. As I said, that was 1960, the character of 1960s counterculture movement. Also experimentation with alternative lifestyles, like there was a lot of drug use and a lot of hard rock music and challenge to authority and established norms. The communal living in 1960s countercultures, like people around the different states were coming and living in a communal places. They were quitting their jobs. There's all different kinds of stuff was happening at the time. They were supporting or they were kind of influencing movements like feminism, anti-war, sexual revolution at the time. It was something about like free love. People can have, the freedom of being with other people, that just led to actually a lot of disasters at the time. During this period, they were fighting against or resisting ideas about race, gender, and identity. So those were the big ideas about countercultures in 1960s. As you can see, like this is the picture, the picture taken at that time. Look at how many people are in there. The counterculture of the 1960s sought to promote radical social change, aiming to create a more egalitarian, liberated, and peaceful society. So the ideas were there, and the people were showing radical actions towards how to change this status quo. When the social movements usually, they are not happy the medium way of doing step-by-step changes, right? They want radical changes in society. So radical political groups in the 1960s and 70s emerged as a part of broader dissatisfaction with the system, injustices, inequalities, or the capitalist mode of like the consumerism policies, racial inequality, and imperialism in general. These groups often grow out of frustration. There was a lot of frustration about some of these injustices in society, with the perceived ineffectiveness of peaceful protests. So they weren't about waiting step by step small changes in society. That changes has to be to the more faster or rapid for these groups. Some of the countercultures, one of them, Black Panthers movement, they were organized or founded in 1960s. They called them BPP. It was very revolutionary socialist organization, and they were against racism, and they were using all kinds of, they were against racism. Also, they carried the weapons with them. That's why it was just kind of too radical for the government to handle them. Wherever they go, that government authorities, just the police followed them. The group advocated for Black empowerment and community self-defense, often carrying firearms as a statement against state violence. course, they weren't actually using those firearms, but they were carrying with them as just kind of making a statement that using this firearms was possibility. While the BPP runs social programs, they had like a lunch, breakfast, free breakfast or lunch programs for children. They opened up some healthcare clinics and educational initiatives. They had different kinds of programs for women. There was all different kinds of socialist programs that's very peaceful. However, this carrying out guns were just not viewed positively by the authorities and the government. And they believed that meaningful change required challenging the state's power directly, sometimes through militant means. In our classes, I talked about Fanon's idea of decolonization, and I said Fanon argues that because colonization is violent, decolonization cannot be without violence. So there's a similar idea goes on in this Black the Black Panther Party. So they were like, if we need to use violence to change this status quo, we will do that, and otherwise we will just keep it for ourselves. Another counterculture we can talk about is Weather Underground. And Weather Underground was an organization, they called it in short WUO. It was formed in 1969. Now you can see these two countercultures organized in a very similar time, one of them 1966 and the other one is 1969, 3 years after the Black Panther party. This was more radical left-wing students who had broken off from the Students for the Democrats Society. So there was a society of students, and they were frustrated by how things were very slow, and then peaceful protests weren't helping to bring out a big change in society. Therefore, the one wing of this organization, or Students for a Democratic Society, was separated from the one wing of the Students for Democratic Party was separated and formed a new Weather Underground organization. So they wanted to overthrow the US government, which they saw as an oppressive and complicit in war crimes, particularly in Vietnam War at the time. So the 1960s and 1960s counterculture was not agree with the United States politics. They were not agree with the decisions made by this power elite. They embraced direct action, including bombings of the government buildings as a form of protest. Now, this movement you can see using more power than even Black Panthers movement. Their shift from nonviolence to militancy was indicative of a broader radicalization among some anti-war activists. Now, first of all, that organizations like non-violent peaceful organizations first started, and then people got frustrated by how slow the changes are, or maybe invisible the changes are. They need big changes, but step-by-step process is too slow for them, and then they come up with a more radical idea. So if there is no changes, government is not listening, authority is not listening to the changes we would like to make in society, now there is an alternative option. There's more radical option. And this is, you can see that radicalization, how radicalization plays in society. It is grows from the reactions of the other institution or the other party. And then this is a response to the other party's reaction to their first movement or actions. And beside this too, there was quite few other revolutionary groups. and that the Liberation Army was one of them, and also there was like a young lords also embraced radicalism. These groups often critique both capitalism and imperialism. Now, when we talk about capitalism, we need to understand what they are against about capitalism. Capitalism about class inequality, that people who has the money make more money. They are the ones who are controlling the information, wealth, and resources in society. So that is what these groups are against. That they are against the big inequality in society, big gap between wealthy and the wealthy and poor. Also, the one small group of bourgeois in Marxist terms, or one small group of capitalists holding and controlling the most of the power and wealth in society. So this is what they are against. So they are also advocating for a complete overhaul of social, political, and economic structures. Many draw inspiration from international revolutionary figures like the Geneva, the Guevara, and Mao Zedong. And these ideologies of Mao Zedong and others were basically providing some ideas to apply in the US society in 1960s. So how this movements changed from peaceful protests or peaceful movement to radical movements in 1960s, the civil rights movement, for example, led by Martin Luther King Jr., focused on peaceful protests and nonviolent civil disobedience. By the late 1960s, a growing sense of frustration from this group that the reform was too slow, not enough, and not the way they wanted the changes, and continuing racial violence, and also involvement in the Vietnam War. We're talking about that many times already. They were frustrated by this stuff, and then they believed that peaceful methods were not sufficient to bring about radical change in society. Therefore, they chose to use some violence to, first of all, get some attention. Secondly, an alternative way of changing status quo in society. The shift towards militancy was driven by a belief that system could not be reformed through conventional means. That means that the step-by-step actions are not enough. And also that, resisting the violent resistance could dismantle oppressive structures. The groups we talked about, that Black Panthers and Weather Underground, justified their use of force as something they need to do that if they wanted the change in society, or to defend marginalized communities and to accelerate revolutionary change in society. So at this point, we can think about what is really radicalism. We are talking about non-violent movements and then groups demanding some change from the governments. That change wasn't enough, or that violence against marginalized groups continued. Now they took a more radical approach. So what is radicalism? Radicalism refers to, or radical refers to, the desire for deep fundamental change, often aimed at altering or the core structures or principles of society, politics or economies. So radical people or radical groups do not believe in step-by-step changes in society, and instead they advocate for complete or revolutionary transformations in society. By being against the status quo or societal norms, or the power existed at the time, how they are ruling the country, being against that is radical itself. That the existing structure is good or bad, being against that means the groups are radical. So the term can apply to both left-wing and right-wing ideologies through the use of power, use of violence. They could achieve their what they wanted from these changes. Also, they wanted to challenge existing status quo by resisting the power, not listening to authorities, or also taking very dramatic approach to fundamental shifts in power in societal structures. Some of the key elements of radicalism that, that's, now we know that they want fundamental change, that step by step some changes, or okay, we will make some changes in the structures that the radical movements we don't need does not satisfy them anymore. So for example, police brutality in the United States, and every time when people brought up this to the attentions of the government, they were like, okay, we will make some changes, we will do that, we will change the police structure. And that was not enough for the radical movements. They wanted the changes, big changes, and they wanted them now. A rejection of gradualism, and that is basically saying, like, we don't believe in step-by-step change. The gradually changing stuff is not enough. The whole system needs to be changed at once. That gradual changes will try to fix something. And they don't believe in that fixing anything. They believe that system needs to be changed, because all this racist ideologies or that capitalist system is built on inequalities and racism. If we don't change the whole structure, and it will still exist even in hundreds of years. The critique of status quo is the very obvious element of radicalism. They tend to think that current system is inherently flawed or oppressive. For example, capitalist system. That capitalism is built on the small group of wealth owners or owners of the means of production, uses the labor of large society to get wealthier, while the large society remains poor. So the whole structure of capitalism is unhealthy. That's their argument. This whole structure needs to be taken down, and it has to be changed. And alternative to capitalism, there was socialism, for example, in the United States. And as we observed, that socialism did not hold, or did not reach that goals, or it wasn't successful in delivering the equality they were talking in the ideology of communism. Use of direct action. Many radical movements support direct action, which may include protests, strikes, civil disobedience, in some cases militancy or armed resistance. And as we know, the government holds the most power, and for these groups to gain some power, they need to bring, powerful people to believe in their ideas and support them. It's a big deal. They need a lot of people, a lot of the trust within their organization. Also, many different kinds of economic and other support groups to move forward against the government. The historical examples of radical movements, we talked about Black Panther Party, and we talked about Weather Underground in the USA in 1960s. Also, we can think of French Revolution as a historical example of radical social movement, where the monarchy and feudal systems were completely dismantled to establish a new order. Radicalism and extremism, they are continuation of one another. I would say that while radicals seek fundamental changes, not all radicals are extremists, which is like extremism often involves the use of violence. Also, the radicalism embrace different kinds of tactics than the radical movements. The radical approach challenges deep-rooted systems, but not all radical movements advocate for use of violence for bring out the changes. Also, you were given you were given an article to read that called Surrealism as Radicalism by Abigail Susik and Elliot H. King. And this is coming from the book called Radical Dreams, Surrealism, Counterculture Resistance by same authors. And the picture is also taken from that book. So this surrealism as radicalism, actually, this is more about the radical culture or counterculture of art in 1960s and 70s. The authors emphasize that surrealism fundamentally opposes that changes was happening with modernization. As we know, in modernization, there was rationalization of work, rationalization of that how productivity and efficiency was very important in capitalist societies. For example, Weber writes about rationalization and says that, that manpower was used to bring that productivity and rationality, and everything was kind of like sought to increase that productivity. For example, people go to work certain time and then they will have their lunch in 4 hours, for example, calculated by sciences that in 4 hours people's brain get tired or they get physically tired. So if they don't take that break, maybe their productivity goes down, right? So this is the rationalization of why people should take 1 hour break after working certain time or the other breaks. So people was basically going to work, working and coming home to rejuvenate and go back to work the next day. Basically, the argument is we have no freedom. We are just selling our labor to the capitalist, just coming home to rejuvenate so we can go back and contribute to capitalist system. So the rejection of rationalism was actually expressed by all these different kinds of art and music, and then that prioritized the unconscious dreams and irrationality. Surreal sought to liberate individuals from societal, all different kind of constraints and explore deeper psychological thought in people. So you can see this, the art, it's just sometimes they're very abstract and, it has like underground political, the force in them. For example, Susik and King argue that surrealism was inherently political. Like it wasn't all about like this nonsense art. It was really deeply political. surrealists engaged with contemporary political issues and ideologies, often aligning themselves with the revolutionary movements. Now, when we are talking about rationality, being against the rationality, they're challenging the status quo, which was that capitalist mode of production that used the human labor as to, keep capitalism furthering itself. So by this art and music, they wanted to disrupt oppressive structures at that time. So some of the pictures or the paintings were very nonsense. It looked very nonsense or abstract. However, they emphasized on individual experiences. For example, if you look at this picture over here, the bird is standing outside of whatever the cage, yet still remaining there, just holding their hands, just raising to reach something. So this chapter highlights the surrealist focus on individual experience and subjective reality. So for them, reality or realism is subjective, and depending on how you view it. This emphasizes the diverse range of expressions and interpretations, promoting personal liberation and questioning societal norms. So again, we are like talking about questioning what is normal in society, why we need to accept certain way of art, besides why we need to accept certain way of lifestyle, why do we need to accept this capitalism, which is very oppressive for us. There's all kinds of questions ingrained in these ideas in the art. And some of the things like you can just notice some elements, for example, lion, it might be a lion, yet there is a human face, the eyes and eyebrows. And then there is the stuff, like there's a human body, like it raised in a way that bird also raised the hands. And also you can see there is a arrow going through the human body here. And there is a lot of stuff here. Everything around this picture is like you can talk about them or analyze them for hours to make sense of what is actually the art is about. So, and this was interdisciplinary approach. It wasn't only, for example, painting or certain things. This was all interdisciplinary. The authors discuss how surrealism transcended traditional artistic boundaries, incorporating literature, film, and other forms of media. As you know, interdisciplinary approach to stuff brings all these different ideas and methods to express self, right? So there are music may be incorporated with some pictures, or music and pictures incorporated into movies or documentaries. So you can see this interdisciplinary way of expressing surrealist ideas. Also over here, like there's a challenge to status quo, like a gender identity, and then also the gender roles. You can see the broken down house with half groom and half bride, or half man and half woman in this picture. Like there is so much like you can interpret this picture in more than one way, actually. For surrealism, then, aimed to confront the desire, the destabilize status quo, questioning established values and ideologies through shocking imagery and unexpected juxtapositions they have in these pictures. And the artists sought to provoke all different kinds of thought in society. And this wasn't only about expression, but also influencing. So we can now connect that idea of power and counterculture with these movements. It is a movement, it is against the status quo, and also they have certain forms of power to change or bring about change in society. So the legacy of and influence of this movements, counterculture movements, is that from that point, how these counterculture movements established they took a radical turn and brought out so many ideas and spread to society, and that civil rights movements or feminist movements followed this countercultural activism. So even today, they continue to inspire those seeking to challenge societal norms and promote freedom of expression in society. In today's world, we can think of like how actually countercultures blend in society and lose the edges that, you know, kind of challenging the societal norms. Maybe the involvement or advancement of social media kind of makes them brings the differences or all different kinds of radical ideas and spread in society. And when those ideas are accepted by the mainstream society, that you can see that counterculture being blended in society, so it loses its age for a change. So this is another way of how subcultures and countercultures lose their significance in society. So in today's short video, I tried to discuss some of the intersections of power, counterculture, and social movements. I hope this lecture helps you to kind of bring your ideas together and think about where do we see this intersections in our lives today, that where power, resistance, counterculture, and movements intersect and try to bring some changes. So that was our short video lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in our next video lecture. Have a great day. Bye-bye.